Today, as we are approaching the beginning of yet another reset that will launch us in 11.2.5, the release of Legion Remix and the half handicapped release of Turbo Boost event, with the increase in our item level without the uncapping of our gilded crests. We have to wait a couple of weeks for that. What we do get though is the balance tuning, which has hit specs and also bosses, because at the end of this weekly reset the Hall of Fame is closing. It's a trend in Blizzard to let the bosses continue towards the end of Hall of Fame without nerfing bosses, I guess, to leave all of the guilds the same chance, the same opportunity to reach Hall of Fame, and then once Hall of Fame closes they can add extra balance tuning. Now, when it comes to the specs being changed, Blizzard shows they don't have a lot of time to spend still in this expansion, since I'm pretty sure they opened up this page right here and they looked at, okay, what do we do? Who do we nerf? Okay, let's just nerf Frost, Arcane, Marksmanship, and BM. They look like to be at the top, so just nerf them. Which is essentially what they did. All 4 of these specs have been nerfed. Now, to be clear, the nerfs are insignificant amounts. They won't really change the power level of these specs. I'm sure in the following weeks we might see some other specs go perhaps slightly ahead of them in the raid. Like Elemental, Fury, Destrolox do have a good chance now to pass them in terms of damage by just a bit, but what is more relevant, of course, is that casually it doesn't happen all the time, but in this case it is one of those cases where the top performing raid specs also happen to be the top performing Mythic Plus specs. For example, last season, the meta, which was even more strict than the meta we have now, the meta was Unholy Balanced Druid Arcane Mage. And if you looked at the damage results at the release of the season, Arcane was middle of the pack, Unholy was very good, and Balance was pretty bad. Then you moved into 11.1.5, Unholy was slightly worse than before, Arcane was even worse than before, and Balance was even worse than before. And then at the very end, in the last couple of months of the patch, Unholy, Arcane, and Balance were still nothing special in the raid. So it's not that it happens all the time that your meta best raid specs also happen to be the meta specs in Mythic Plus, but it did happen this season. So Blizzard didn't want to, of course, make it too complicated. Frost DK is nerfed by 3% in their damage, Arcane is nerfed by 3% in their damage. Marksmanship and BM gets a slightly different treatment, even though the result is about the same. It's still meant to reach that kind of number. For BM, Black Arrow and Bleak Powder are nerfed by 8%, and for Marksmanship, Black Arrow and Bleak Powder are nerfed by 6%. Now, the reason for this slight difference in a larger nerf for BM isn't just that BM was already doing more damage than Marksmanship, but also because BM has slightly more damage from Black Arrow than Marksmanship does, mostly due to Marksmanship having slightly more damage from their passive Master Marksman and from Aim Shot, whereas BM from their pets doesn't get nearly enough damage, especially in single target. When they are not benefiting from Beast Cleave and their AoE, their Black Arrow damage goes up a bit more. But this results in about the same number of nerf. In this random priory very high key, you have Black Arrow doing 46% of your damage. Bleak Powder is nerfed by 8%, so this is a 2% overall damage nerf, and the remaining number of your Black Arrow damage is 23%, 24%, which is also nerfed by 8%. It's a 2% damage nerf as well. So the total for BM in terms of nerf is more or less 4%, which is higher in AoE than in single target. Obviously, because in AoE you don't benefit much at all from Bleak Powder, which is being nerfed. So it is all in all a pretty small nerf, all things considered. These were the specs in contention for a spot, for example, in Mythic Plus. We just had our video covering how Arcane, for example, was losing their spot in top-level Mythic Plus keys over BM Hunter. You can see now, for example, that in the 3 most popular comps at high keys, very high keys, these are not from the keys higher than 16 or higher than 17, these are actually the highest in the plus 20 range. You see Frost and Havoc, but then you also see BM, BM, BM. There is no more Arcane in the top 3 most popular comps right now in Mythic Plus when it comes to the highest of levels. So Arcane being nerfed is an even bigger hit for them and their chances of remaining at this level. That's true, their competition has also been nerfed, but they have been nerfed at a similar rate anyways. So this won't really change the power level of BM. You might have more room now for perhaps other specs contesting the spot of Arcane, like Elemental, which has taken the place not just of Arcane, but in this case of Havoc Demon Hunter, which hasn't been nerfed in this reset. You notice how nobody is talking about Frost, because that's irrelevant. They might have been nerfed by 3% for their results in the raid. They might now have other specs passing them in results in the raid, but when it comes to Mythic Plus, they are very, very safe. As we mentioned multiple times, the power level of Frost DK is very similar to the power level that last season Unholy and Balanced Druid had in the comp, not of the one that Arcane had in the comp. The power level that makes you do the first pull of a plus 20 Priory when you have all of your CDs and Bloodlust and you're pulling the first mini-boss, with Frost DK doing tons of damage, of course, and then you look at who is doing damage to the most dangerous guy in the pack and the one with the most HP that you want to kill faster than the others, of course, and you see that that's not where the power of Frost DK is. Their power is on doing more, blanket AoE damage to the other, I guess, smaller mobs all around the pack. And they didn't really have that many others to contest them in power. So you could have had, for example, Arcane or Havoc, or back a while ago even Assassination, talking about doing priority damage, funnel damage, higher damage on single target. But when it came to Frost, there weren't really many debates on who was being taken for that role of heavy spread, consistent AoE damage. It has been Frost pretty much for the entirety of this season. And no, this 3% damage nerf isn't actually going to change whether or not they stay as the number 1 pick for this role. Now the other nerf is the one we mentioned being Hall of Fame related, because now that Hall of Fame is closed, they are nerfing the last 2 bosses again, Nexus King and Dimensius. And the nerf to Nexus King is pretty straightforward. It wasn't the kind of boss where you had to sort of plan around the different phases of the boss, even as a boss with a damage amp. There wasn't a lot of, let's just say, stop DPS, because you wanted to line up phases with your CDs or anything, and these nerfs don't really do much besides making the boss simpler in you taking less damage. There isn't even, for example, a single health reduction of anyone. Not the boss, not the dragon he summons, not the adds, nothing. You have Conquer Magic damage, Vanquish damage, Behead damage, the Voidwing melee damage, the Galactic Smash, and the Star Shattered damage in the last phase, all being reduced by 10%, and you have the beams spawning in P1 being reduced again. They were 9, now they are 8, and they take slightly longer to activate between each other. So it's just pretty much damage nerfs all around. No health nerf, no health reduction on anyone in the encounter. You just take significantly less damage now. Who gets changed though even more significantly is Dimensius, because on top of having still raid damage nerfs being in here, so the massive smash of the boss, the shattered space damage are both reduced by 20%, the health of the adds in P1, the living masses, are reduced by 10%, the 2 mini-bosses in the 2 flying phases, Artotion and Pargoth, have their health reduced by 5%, and the adds in those phases, the Void Warden you want to kill so you can move between sections, and the Nullbinders you want to kill as well, nerfed in HP by 10 and 20%. Interestingly enough, not actually any technical and mechanical nerfs in P3. We only get the cosmic radiation, which is the ticking rate damage that happens, nerfed by 10% in P3, but nothing about the rings, the stars, or anything of the source, the devours, nothing in that phase is being changed. What is relevant though in these nerfs is that Dimensius was progressively becoming a more annoying stop DPS kind of boss the more you went essentially deeper in your progression, or for some guilds of course deeper in your farm. That is because logically this is how the fight looks. You start the pull, you want to take about 3.5 minutes to get past the first phase, and then you will take 1.5 minutes for the first ad, 1.5 minutes for the second ad, and then the last phase lasting 3+ minutes. Now, logically, when you start to plan your CDs, you start with a simple solution. Let's just use our 2-minute CDs on pull, and then 2 minutes in, 4 minutes in, 6 minutes in, 8 minutes in, right? Simple. This creates a problem though. The most important place to put your CDs is here, is at 6:30 is when you're landing down in the last phase where the boss takes double damage. You can use your bloodlust, you can use your potions, right? So you put yourself in a position where you must have your CDs here. Like no matter what, you want the CDs to be able to be here. So you have to start redesigning CDs around using them on pull, but then making sure they are also available here. So you have two solutions essentially. You either also use a second round of CDs in P1, but then you will lose them at the beginning of the first ad, or you simply bite the pillow and miss an entire use of CDs because you want them, you save them to make them ready as soon as you land. Because as you see, these phases, using these CDs in the middle of these phases is very hectic. You have to run across the platform, you have to spread for the gravity mechanic, and then you're getting pushed back by the winds. You don't exactly have a lot of time to stand still and do your damage with your CDs. So it's much more yield of DPS if you are free to use your CDs as soon as you land on the platform and there is nothing happening for a while. However, nowadays we aren't even in the situation where most specs actually have 2-minute CDs, right? Frost DKs have Breath of Sindragosa on 90-second CDs, Arcane Mages have Arcane Surge on a 90-second CDs, the tier set puts Call of the Wild for Hunters at a 1-minute CD. You also have other 1 minute or 90 seconds or multiple charges cooldowns like Storm, Earth and Fire for Windwalker Monks, Dark Ascension for Shadow Priests, so they're all much shorter, in which case it makes it, as you can see here, much easier to line up the CDs with the different beginning of the phases. However, this is where the stop DPS came from. You want to stop DPS at the end of P1 to stretch P1 as long as possible, so that your CDs come back off cooldown. This is mainly for healers, to have them back when they come back in P1. But then you also want to stretch P1 ad phase, because if 90-second CDs are used as soon as you land, you want to be able to use those 90-second CDs as soon as you land in the second ad platform, which means you want to make this phase last 90 seconds, the duration of the fight plus the flying, which takes you about 30 seconds. So you want to delay killing of this ad to make sure you can then land in this platform with your CDs. But then the problem repeats. Now you want these CDs to come back during the damage jump of Dimensius. So if you use the 90-second CDs on pull, you want to stretch this phase to be 90 seconds so that when you land, you have your CDs for the damage jump. So this created a constant loop of having to stop DPS in order to line up your CDs to be able to maximize the damage on each platform. Now, with these nerfs, essentially, this is the attempt. The phases will be easy enough and simple enough that you don't need to stop DPS nearly as much, because you gained the damage you would have gained by using your CDs, you now gained it by the bosses having their health nerfed. So now you can just use them on pull, 90 seconds in, and then just transition the boss whenever. Doesn't matter, even if you land without CDs, it's whatever, the bosses have been nerfed, you can just kill them without CDs and you don't have to stop DPS nearly as much. That is the biggest gain on Dimensius for guilds that already have killed Dimensius, pretty much. The biggest gain for guilds that are still progressing on Dimensius are just the damage nerf of the boss, where you take less damage across the encounter, as well as the HP nerf of the adds in P2. As mentioned, P3 has not been made easier though, so you still have to learn all of the placement of your soaks, your gravities in between stars, be able to spread, be able to do the rings correctly. None of that has been nerfed, but getting there though, at least now getting to that phase has gotten significantly easier thanks to these nerfs. So this is what we have for today on this Tuesday. The nerfs to the last two bosses, I guess you can say the nerfs to the two strongest bosses and nerfs to the three strongest specs in Mythic Plus. Although the nerfs to the specs in Mythic Plus will not have nearly as much of an effect compared to the nerfs to these bosses in the raid. Of course, there is also the fact that this week you're also gaining another 3% damage and healing increase from your renown, and turbo boost is beginning. The cap to your item level has been increased by 6, so these bosses will get even easier, will continue to get easier on top of these nerfs. I will be surprised if we get to see any other nerfs to the raid after this last one, considering how more powerful we are all going to get in a matter of a couple of weeks with the turbo boost event and our incoming best in slot gear vendor that will come out in 2 resets. But for today though, on this Tuesday, this is all that we have for this weekly reset and the beginning of patch 11.2.5. Now, with this out of the way, I'm now going to leave you to presumably your Great Vault yields. Hoping for some good fortune, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I stopped it. I knew it ahead of time, so I just closed my window and completely silenced the barking concert this time.